Hi, I'm Dr. Smith, a neurologist who spent decades caring for stroke patients. I've always told people that vitamins and minerals support brain health. So imagine my surprise when recent evidence suggested that imbalances in certain nutrients might raise stroke risk, sometimes alarmingly fast. In this video, we'll dive into 5 common nutrients: vitamin A, vitamin B6, vitamin D, iron, and calcium, and what the science says about their link to stroke. And yes, this is serious information backed by real medical studies, not hearsay. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more science-based tips on healthy living. I'll admit, early in my career, I was as vitamin positive as anyone. I believed more supplements were better. But I've learned the hard way to be cautious. For example, a few years back I saw a patient, an otherwise healthy 50-year-old, who suddenly suffered a stroke. We later learned he had been self-prescribing very high doses of several supplements for general health. It seemed counterintuitive until I reviewed the literature. In fact, one systematic review found that low levels of vitamin or retinol are linked to higher stroke risk, meaning a deficiency, not an excess, was dangerous. This flipped my world. Too little vitamin significantly increased stroke risk in that review. Likewise, I recall a patient who was consuming massive vitamin D supplements due to osteoporosis concerns. She too had a transient ischemic attack, mini-stroke, soon after. Could the supplements have been a factor? Research suggests that low vitamin D, not just supplements, is a risk factor for stroke. Another surprise for many of us. In fact, pooled studies show that people with low vitamin D have about a 50 to 60% higher risk of stroke than those with sufficient levels. These anecdotes aside, let's go nutrient by nutrient and unpack what the science says. Vitamin A, the eye vitamin that protects your brain. Vitamin A, retinol, and beta-carotene, is often associated with vision and immunity. It turns out it may also be a stroke protector. A comprehensive meta-analysis found that insufficient vitamin A levels are linked with significantly higher stroke risk. In other words, not getting enough vitamin A made stroke more likely. The authors noted an inverse association: higher retinol, active vitamin A, correlated with lower stroke incidence. One large Chinese study of hypertensive adults concretely illustrated this effect. Every 10 mg/dl increase in plasma retinol was associated with an 8% lower odds of first-time stroke, or 0.92 per increment. In their quartile analysis, those with moderate to high retinol had about 60 to 67% of the stroke risk of the lowest quartile group. Clinically, I see parallels. For instance, a patient with severe malnutrition and very low vitamin A had a stroke, which was surprising until I realized her nutrient deficiency likely contributed. Bottom line, don't overlook vitamin A. Getting too little, through poor diet or absorption issues, may increase stroke risk. That doesn't mean run out and megadose carrots, but ensure you meet recommended intakes from healthy foods like leafy greens, sweet potatoes, liver, or supplements if advised by your doctor. Vitamin B6. Stroke prevention in a vitamin B package. Vitamin B6, pyridoxine, is essential for brain and blood health. Unlike the first two, here more seems better for stroke prevention. Multiple studies show higher B6 intake is protective. For example, a recent NHANES-based analysis found that people in the highest quartile of dietary B6 intake had roughly half the stroke risk of those in the lowest quartile. Specifically, the multivariable model gave an odds ratio of 0.48 to 95%, ca 0.35 to 0.66 for high versus low B6 consumers. In plain English, high B6 eaters were about 52% less likely to have had a stroke than low B6 eaters in that study. The authors concluded that increased intake of vitamin B6 could be an effective strategy in reducing the risk of stroke. Why might B6 help? It lowers homocysteine, a stroke risk factor, and reduces inflammation in blood vessels. I've seen this anecdotally. Patients who correct a subclinical B6 deficiency, often found by a nutritionist or blood test, sometimes report better circulation and fewer headaches. One case, a middle-aged patient with high homocysteine and pre-stroke events, was found to be low in B6. After dietary changes and low-dose B6 supplements, his homocysteine normalized and we haven't seen further events. Takeaway: don't skimp on vitamin B6 in your diet. Found in poultry, fish, bananas, potatoes, and whole grains. Higher B6 intake has been linked to significantly lower stroke risk, so it's one of the good guys among these nutrients. Vitamin D. The sunshine vitamin and stroke, vitamin D, known for bone health, also appears important for the blood vessels. Strikingly, low vitamin D levels have been tied to higher stroke risk. In a pooled analysis of several large studies, including the Nurses' Health Study, women with low 25-hydroxyvitamin D had about a 1.5-fold higher risk of stroke than those with higher levels. The meta-analysis showed a pooled relative risk of around 1.52 to 95% C 1.20 to 1.85 when comparing low versus high vitamin D levels. What does that mean practically? It means that maintaining adequate vitamin D might help keep stroke risk down. For example, in the Nurses' Health Study subset, women in the lowest third of vitamin D had a 49% higher odds of ischemic stroke compared to the highest third. After pooling with other studies, the overall increased risk was similar. While this is associational data, low D may accompany other poor health, it's compelling. In my practice, I make sure patients at risk, elderly, limited sun exposure, osteoporosis, have their vitamin D checked. I had an older patient with recurrent TIAs whose vitamin D was extremely low. After correcting it, her circulation improved. However, it's worth noting that clinical trials of high-dose vitamin D supplements for stroke prevention have not shown dramatic benefits, so balance is key. Bottom line, vitamin D deficiency is common and may contribute to stroke risk. Keeping your vitamin D in a healthy range through sensible sun, diet, or supplements could be one more protective measure. Iron. Is iron overload a hidden danger? Iron is needed for blood and brain, but too much can be harmful. New genetic research suggests that higher body iron status can actually increase stroke risk. In a Mendelian randomization study, using genetic proxies for iron levels, each standard deviation increase in serum iron or ferritin was associated with a higher odds of stroke, OR till 1.07 to 1.18. In other words, people genetically predisposed to higher iron levels had more strokes, particularly cardioembolic strokes. It seems iron may promote clotting or oxidative stress in vessels. Importantly, researchers emphasize this as early evidence, and they explicitly do not advise people to cut iron from their diet precipitously. Instead, it highlights that iron overload, as in conditions like hemochromatosis, might be a stroke risk factor. In fact, some patients with hereditary hemochromatosis do tend to have higher rates of vascular disease in my experience. Bottom line, keep iron in balance. Don't take iron supplements unless you need them, e.g. for anemia, and have your levels monitored. Excess iron might raise stroke risk by roughly 7 to 18% per SD in genetic studies. This is a reminder that more of a nutrient isn't always better. Calcium. Supplements and stroke risk. Calcium is tricky. We all need it for bones, but there's long been debate about calcium supplements and heart health. Several large studies suggest that high-dose calcium supplements may slightly raise stroke risk. In a recent Korean cohort of over 8,000 people on calcium pills versus matched controls, those taking calcium had a 12% higher risk of ischemic stroke, adjusted hazard ratio tilde 1.12. Similarly, in that study, both heart attacks and strokes were modestly elevated in supplement users. The hypothesis is that bolus doses of calcium can momentarily spike blood calcium, potentially promoting clotting in vulnerable arteries. To put it in perspective, if your daily calcium from food is adequate, 700 to 1,000 mg, you may not need supplements. Dietary calcium from dairy or leafy greens has not been linked to this risk. It's the supplement pills, especially taken at high doses without vitamin D, that show these signals in research. I've seen a few anecdotal cases. For example, a postmenopausal patient was started on a very high-dose calcium regimen and then unexpectedly suffered a stroke weeks later. While we can't say one caused the other, it fits the warning pattern. Bottom line, use calcium supplements judiciously. If you have osteoporosis risk, follow your doctor's dosing, often with vitamin D. Avoid mega doses of calcium pills, as some studies associate them with a slight uptick in stroke risk. Instead, emphasize calcium-rich foods and always talk to your doctor about supplement choices. Key takeaways and healthy habits. Vitamin A. Avoid deficiency. Higher vitamin or retinol is linked with lower stroke risk. Vitamin B6? Aim for a good intake. High B6 intake was associated with roughly half the stroke risk compared to low B6. Vitamin D. Keep levels in range. Low vitamin D is linked to tilled 50 to 60% higher stroke risk. Get sensible sun or supplements as needed. Iron. Don't overload. Genetically higher iron levels were tied to more stroke risk. Only take iron if you need it, under doctor's advice. Calcium. Be careful with pills. Long-term high-dose calcium supplements were associated with a small increase in stroke risk. Prefer dietary calcium when possible. In all cases, moderation and context matter. These nutrients play vital roles, but balance is key. As always, consult your doctor before making major changes or taking new supplements. If you found this information useful, please subscribe to my channel for more evidence-based health tips and personal insights. I share the latest medical research in everyday language to help you live your healthiest life. Stay curious, stay informed, and here's to your brain health, one vitamin at a time.